wasted potential. Maybe that's the first thing that comes to your mind when you think of Gohan in Dragon Ball. For a long time, Gohan was my favorite character, especially in the Majin Buu saga, where he kind of becomes the main character of the story. Maybe just like you, I didn't like him when he was a kid. I only started to get more attached to the character as he grew up. He becomes the main character of the story at certain moments, even though he's quite different from Goku, the main character, and his father. Gohan is a shy, introspective child who cries easily and shows remarkable intelligence for his young age. It's worth remembering that he was only 4 years old at the beginning of Dragon Ball Z, and even though he inherited this extraordinary power from Goku, Gohan doesn't share his father's enthusiasm for fighting. This becomes a fundamental point in analyzing the character. Gohan, he wants to be something else. He wants to be a scholar, and I never understood that. With so much power, with so much potential to do other things, why would I want to study? So what I'm saying is that I wouldn't study if I could do something else. That's what I'm saying. Everyone has witnessed this story before. That child who is born with all sorts of expectations from different people and from themselves. This has already happened in Dragon Ball with Vegeta. Gohan is the son of the strongest Majin in the universe, and he grows up in a context where he also needs to become strong. But Gohan is the son of Goku, but also of Chi-Chi, a human. In other words, he needed to reconcile both cultures at the same time. If it's hard to reconcile two cultures from different countries, imagine what it would be like to reconcile two cultures from different planets. Gohan has a father whose literal duty is to save planet Earth. And this is very important, and you'll understand why. Gohan already had huge responsibilities just by being born into this scenario. And Gohan was never against this, he always accepted it. Some children have the trait of accepting things more easily, especially shy children, which was his case. Although the tendency to internalize rules quickly evolved as a natural inclination, both a child's temperament and parenting style determine the strength of these internalized expectations. Even Pavlov's dogs, famous for demonstrating how the environment shapes behavior, showed temperament differences that affected their ability to be conditioned, and this also applies to children. Some children have what psychologists call temperamental resistance to control, which interferes with their ability to internalize rules. And we can say that Gohan does not fit this profile. He is part of the group of children who show temperamental regularity, persistence, and a positive mood, which actually helps them internalize rules more easily. But here's the thing. So in this scenario, Gohan already was born with the pressure to be strong. From a young age, there were already signs that his power would flourish greatly, even though he wasn't a full-blooded Saiyan. He would develop in terms of strength beyond from the other humans on Earth. This supposed ability would bring him even more pressure, consequently. Gohan lived under this intense pressure to achieve what everyone expected of him, a hope that he would even surpass his own father, Goku. And in fact, on many occasions, we see Gohan almost breaking through that barrier. But since we tend to return to our natural state, our normal state, because that's what happens with any behavior that is unnatural. You return to your baseline, you go back to your previous state. And that's exactly what happened with Gohan. He would make a lot of progress, then stop evolving. Your mind actively monitors your behavior to determine your mood. So if you're feeling sad but force a smile, your brain will conclude that maybe you're not that sad after all and will release more happiness hormones. The philosopher William James was one of the first to notice this peculiarity. In fact, he was the one who said, if you want a quality, act as if you already have it. Gohan tries to shape his behavior precisely based on this idea since he is a peaceful child. And just like almost all Saiyans, they get stronger when they're angry. And Gohan always had to make a greater effort because he never actually liked fighting. But of course, at 5 years old, he had his neck broken by Raccoon. How, right? How? I clearly remember the episodes where Chi-Chi tried to force Gohan to study. And at the time, I thought that made no sense at all. Why did he have to study? He was powerful. He could have whatever he wanted for himself, but Chi-Chi had a point. Being powerful wouldn't give them money to survive. And there was always a comparison between Chi-Chi's family and Bulma's family. But Gohan's personality just didn't seem to fit in with fighting. Gohan, just like me, was also an introverted child who didn't like talking to people much, preferred to be out in nature, playing with animals, but he couldn't have such a comfortable and simple life. After Goku's death, Piccolo became responsible for training Gohan and put the 4-year-old boy through countless endurance tests to shape a kid who didn't have a fighting spirit. And this in fact transformed Gohan. It made him learn to fend for himself and brought him more independence. Gohan became more resilient and stronger. This prepared him for the battles against the Saiyans, and it was in this saga that he witnessed several deaths, including Piccolo's, who had been present in his life. And this situation, in a way, put even more pressure on Gohan, creating a kind of sense of urgency that he had to fight and become stronger. After these deaths, he started to have more responsibilities. This responsibility leads him to go to the planet Namek, and that's where he experiences tremendous growth, because there he also goes through many experiences just as traumatic as what he went through with the Saiyans. Thinkers point out that, although evolutionary changes occur over millennia, we have the power to shape our brains throughout our lives through the brain's ability to reorganize itself, basically forming new neural connections. Our experiences and the ways we engage with them can enhance or diminish specific brain functions. This means that intentional actions we take daily can significantly impact our mental and physical well-being. This happens when it shows his POV with Trunks in an alternate reality where Goku wasn't there. It seemed like Gohan had evolved or matured psychologically by decades. There, it was just him. There, the responsibility was his. He was the only one who could defeat the androids, and that constant state of stress made him very strong. There was no other option. He couldn't just stay in his own corner pretending nothing was happening. He was the one responsible there. And this is my favorite Gohan. This version is the one that faces Majin Buu, that mystical Gohan, the one who doesn't turn Super Saiyan but is still very strong. Why didn't Gohan like to fight? Well, besides the fact that he's shy, introverted, quieter, and doesn't like conflict much, fighting brought him trauma. For him, power was associated with becoming stronger, but also with the people he kept losing. The thinker Gabor Mate wrote, "Whether we realize it or not, it is our wounds or the way we deal with them that dictate much of our behavior, shape our social habits, and inform our way of thinking about the world." We can say that almost everyone has some kind of trauma. Someone without any trauma at all would be almost a stranger in society. Gabor Mate even mentions that many of us walk around with unhealed wounds from childhood and other experiences. Basically, we act and react based on our personal experiences. And if any of those experiences were very negative, we carry them with us. And Gohan carried these experiences with him throughout the anime. So add this trauma to the pressure to be the best, plus Chi-Chi's expectations for him to become a great scholar, and we have a character who carries quite a few burdens. Young Gohan saw his friends die. Piccolo, who was a strong figure for him, and Goku at certain moments as well. The idea that was sold to him was, if he trained, he would become the strongest. And in fact, in Dragon Ball, for those who train, especially for the Saiyans, training brings incredible power. It seems that if Gohan trained, he would be much stronger than Goku and Vegeta. And after Goku's death in the Cell Saga, Gohan now had the responsibility of being the one to protect Earth. However, it's precisely here that things really start to get complicated. In this saga, he tries to be the warrior who protects people, and that leads him to become the great Saiyaman. But at the same time, he can't train as hard as he used to. The anger he had channeled in the Cell Saga, which allowed him to defeat Cell, was no longer there. And what we see in the Majin Buu saga is a more passive character. And to the disappointment of fans of the character, we see a Gohan who is weaker than before. Gohan only takes part in the martial arts tournament because of Videl. It's as if for him, a fighting environment is a very small motivator. This made Gohan inconsistent in his training, especially after he became an adult. This is something Vegeta does the opposite of. Vegeta is always training, whether there are enemies or not. But for Gohan, that's not the case. He needs a big motivator to train. And the reason for that is pretty obvious. Vegeta is motivated by fighting and has that whole rivalry with Goku. It's the thing he loves most. For Gohan, it's not. The release of dopamine doesn't depend only on receiving a reward, but also on the animal's expectation regarding the value and delivery of that reward. Neuroscientist Wolfgang Schuss, mathematician Peter Dayan, and psychiatrist Ray Dolan demonstrated that each test of positive reinforcement training produces two distinct bursts of neural activation in an animal's brain. One of them is linked to receiving the reward. Up to this point, there's nothing new about that. It's simply a sign that neurons fire and release dopamine when the reward is given. This is the basis of positive reinforcement training. And why is this important? If you don't feel motivated by something, or if your brain doesn't perceive the benefit of completing a certain task, it's unlikely you'll find the determination to complete the task. One thing you can do is reinforce yourself. Self-reinforcement is an example of a self-regulatory process in which individuals reward themselves if their behavior meets their self-prescribed performance standards. And if a favorable event is associated with a behavior, that behavior will be strengthened and will be more likely to occur in the future. Like Gohan participating in the martial arts tournament because of financial reasons. This explains why Gohan will never be Goku. The thing is, if you have a benchmark of strength, specifically Goku, to surpass, it's hard to exceed expectations, even if you're his son. For someone to push themselves to extremely high levels of effort, motivation is needed, because our brain decides when we should persist or give up on something. Goku is motivated purely by the fight itself, by the adrenaline of a battle that brings him a challenge. Someone very powerful. Gohan doesn't have that. Or if he does, it's at a very low level. And in this regard, it's hard to fool the brain. The study, for example, shows how the brain responds to mental exhaustion, identifying two key regions, the right insula and the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, which become more active as cognitive fatigue increases. Using functional magnetic resonance imaging, the researchers observed how the volunteers responded to challenging memory tasks and how their willingness to continue changed based on internal fatigue and rewards. The more mentally exhausted the participants felt, the more activity these brain regions showed. And that's why we can't understand Gohan. Fighting isn't that positive for him, it's not that reinforcing. If he fought, if he made an effort at some point, it wasn't something completely natural. It was out of necessity. So for a long time, Gohan wasn't really allowed to do what he wanted. When he was a child, they forced him to study. Then later they forced him to fight. And then in fact, when he was finally able to choose something, as an adult, he chose to study. Life is a kind of constant struggle between what you want and what you need to do. And then, when we think in the long term, both sides are right. If you only do what is necessary, you run the risk of losing yourself in the process and never feeling satisfied with what you're doing. Likewise, doing everything you want will eventually cause a big problem. Because a good part of the things that give us a sense of meaning involve doing what you don't want to. Take Gohan as an example. He would have a life that wasn't aligned with who he is if he had to fight all the time. Likewise, he would have a life full of regrets if he only studied and ignored the dangers of the world, which he was fully capable of facing. In both situations, things just don't add up. Because to be human, you need to accept yourself. And to be a hero, you need to sacrifice yourself. Like, subscribe and share.